The morning light was perfect. It streamed through the big windows of the bridal suite, catching all the little bits of dust in the air, making everything feel soft and golden. I was helping my sister with her veil. My hands were shaking just a little as I tried to pin it into her hair without messing up a single curl. She looked absolutely stunning, a real-life princess. And I was the maid of honor, smiling so wide my cheeks ached, playing my part perfectly. But underneath that smile, my heart was this heavy cold stone in my chest. Everyone kept saying how wonderful it was, the two of us so close sharing this day. They didn't know that every time I looked at Mark, standing tall and handsome at the end of that aisle, a part of me was breaking all over again. I woke up with a jolt. My head was pounding, a thick fuzzy pain behind my eyes. The room was pitch black. I fumbled for my phone, but it was dead, completely dead. I staggered to the door and turned the handle. It didn't budge. It was locked from the outside. Panic, cold and sharp, shot through me. I started pounding on the door, calling out, but my voice was hoarse, weak. That's when I heard it, the muffled sound of music, a bass beat. Laughter. The reception was in full swing. The officiant tried again, his voice firmer. Do you Mark take you, Clara? Mark took a deep, shaky breath. His voice, when it came, was low, but clear, cutting through the tension like a knife. I Mark, he said, his eyes still fixed on me, burning with intensity. Take you, Elizabeth. The use of my name, not Clara's. It wasn't just a word. It was a key turning a lock I didn't know existed. It was a trigger. The floodgates burst. A cascade of images, sounds, feelings crashed over me, drowning out the gasp that erupted from the crowd. It wasn't a trickle, it was an ocean. I remembered meeting Mark at that art gallery, opening him, spilling his drink on my dress, and being so mortified. He bought me the most expensive coffee of my life to apologize. I remembered our first real date, a picnic that got rained out, and we ended up eating sandwiches in his car, laughing until we cried. I remembered the quiet, ordinary moments, Sunday mornings, with the newspaper spread across the kitchen table, his hand on the small of my back, when we walked together the way he always knew. When it had a bad day, just by the way I sighed. I remembered the night he proposed. It wasn't grand or public. We were on a hike at the top of a hill, overlooking the city. As the sun set, he was so nervous, he dropped the ring, and we spent 10 minutes searching through the leaves, both of us laughing hysterically. I remembered Clara, her constant, subtle criticisms of him. He's not ambitious enough for you, Liz. Are you sure he's the one you seem to be settling? I remembered the strained smiles, the way she'd always find a way to insert herself into our plans. I remembered the look on her face the day I showed her my engagement ring. It wasn't happiness. It was a cold, calculating envy, quickly masked. And I remembered the accident, the rain-slicked road, the frantic phone call from Clara, crying, saying there was a problem with the wedding venue, that I needed to come right away, the blinding headlights of the truck hydroplaning into my lane, the screech of tires, the shattering of glass. I felt along the walls, desperate for a way out, for some light. My fingers brushed against a vent near the ceiling. It was loose. I managed to pry it open just enough to get a sliver of a view. I pulled a chair over and stood on it, peering through the narrow gap. The vent looked out onto the main reception hall. I could see the dance floor, the tables decorated with flowers, all our friends and family laughing and talking. And then I saw them, Clara and Mark. It wasn't an accident. It was a consequence of her lie set in motion long before that day. The world snapped back into focus, sharp and painfully clear. The chaos in the chapel was real now. People were standing, whispering, shouting. Clara's face was a mask of pure, undiluted fury. What are you doing? She screamed at Mark, her voice. But Mark was already moving. He was stepping away from the altar, away from her, his eyes never leaving mine. He was coming towards me. I stood up. My legs felt weak, but a new strength born of absolute certainty coursed through me. The truth was a solid thing inside me, now a foundation where there had only been shifting sand. I looked straight at my sister, at the woman who had tried to steal my life, and my voice, when it came, was clear and strong, ringing through the chapel. Stop, that's my wedding. The silence that followed was absolute. Mark reached my side, his hand finding mine, his grip firm and real. It's true, he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. I am marrying Elizabeth. I love Elizabeth. Clara lied about everything. The collapse was swift and total, the vindication in Mark's eyes, the shock and dawning horror on the faces of our family and friends. The way Clara seemed to shrink under the weight of her exposed deception. She didn't cry. She just stood there, exposed, her perfect day crumbling into dust around her. But I wasn't looking at her anymore. I was looking at Mark, at the man I loved. The memories were all there, every single one restored. And vibrant, the amnesia was gone, burned away by the sheer force of a love that even my sister's treachery couldn't extinguish. He had recognized me when I couldn't recognize myself. In that moment of hesitation, in the speaking of my true name, he had called me back from the void. I had my past back. And standing there holding his hand, I knew I had my future too. When I agreed to marry Alexander, I knew it wasn't about love. We sat across from each other in his lawyer's office. The mahogany desk so vast it felt like a continent between us. The air smelled of old books and expensive coffee. He laid out the terms with a calm professional detachment that I found oddly comforting. A 3-year contract, a merger of his corporate empire with my family's failing shipping company. My father sitting beside me looked 10 years younger. Just hearing the numbers, for me it was a life of financial security, a gilded cage, but a cage nonetheless. Alexander was clear: discretion, public appearances, a unified front. In return, my family's debts would be cleared, and I would want for nothing. I signed the papers. It was the most practical decision I had ever made. She was wearing my dress, the specific deep blue maid of honor dress I had spent months picking out. She was standing right next to him, her hand on his arm, leaning in to whisper something in his ear. She was playing my role. She had taken my place. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The dizziness, the locked door. It wasn't an accident. She had planned this. She wanted me out of the way, completely erased from the picture. She wanted to be the only sister he saw, the only one standing by his side. My sister Chloe saw it differently. From the moment the engagement was announced, she was a storm of barely concealed outrage. Selling yourself like a commodity, shed sneer. Sipping the very expensive champagne the arrangement had paid for. Its barbaric. Don't you have any self-respect? Shed pace. My new apartment, her fingers trailing over the silk drapes, the original art on the walls, her envy a bitter perfume in the air. She called him the tycoon in that mocking tone, but her eyes would linger on photographs of his estate, his yacht, the sheer scale of his wealth. She coveted it all, not as a means to an end like I did, but as an end in itself. The life was the prize. The week of the wedding, the pressure became a physical weight on my chest. The dress fittings, the media scrutiny, the endless list of powerful guests. It was all so suffocatingly real. I found myself trembling over the wedding invitations, my vision blurring. I called Chloe. I needed my sister. I confessed everything, my voice shaking. I told her I had cold feet, that I was terrified of committing my life to a man I didn't love, of being a paid companion in a loveless marriage. I sobbed that I didn't think I could go through with it. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then her voice softened into a concerned whisper. "Oh, honey," she said, "you can't do this to yourself. You should run. Just get in your car and drive. I'll handle Alexander. I'll explain it to him. Soften the blow. He's a businessman. Hell, understand. Cold feet. Just go. I'll take care of everything." Her words felt like a lifeline. It was the push I needed in a blind panic. I packed a single bag, got in the car Alexander had given me, and just drove. I ended up at a cheap motel 200 miles away, the silence of the room deafening. I turned off my phone, convinced I had escaped a terrible fate, grateful for a sister willing to face the dragon on my behalf. I was so naive. What I didn't know was that the moment I hung up, Chloe had put her own plan into motion. She went straight to Alexander's penthouse. She didn't go to soften the blow, she went to present an alternative. I learned this later from Alexander himself. He described how she stood in his living room not as a distressed relative, but as a negotiator. She told him I was unstable, emotionally fragile, that I had a history of running from my problems. She painted a picture of me as a liability, a risk. His carefully constructed image, "The merger is what's important," shed, argued. The public announcement has been made, the press is already gathered. To call it off now would be a humiliation, a sign of instability that could affect your stock price. And then she made her offer. She was the stable one, the pragmatic one. She understood the business. She was in every measurable way a better fit for the contract than I ever was. She was willing to step in and save the deal. Alexander told me he just stared at her, this woman selling herself with a ruthless efficiency that chilled him. He said he saw the naked greed in her eyes, the calculation. But he is above all a pragmatist. The wedding was a spectacle, a public signal to his investors. A cancellation would indeed be costly. My sister was right about that. And in his mind, one sister was as good as another for the terms of the contract. The merger was the constant, the bride was a variable, so reluctantly, coldly, he agreed the arrangements were shifted, the wedding would go on. I knew none of this. I was in that motel room watching the minutes tick by on a cheap digital clock, imagining the chaos I had left behind. I thought of Alexander's cold anger, my father's disappointment. I felt guilty for leaving Chloe to clean up my mess. I finally turned on my phone, expecting a torrent of frantic messages. There was nothing from my family, just a single news alert: billionaire Alexander Vance's wedding to proceed as scheduled amid last-minute changes. My heart stopped. I clicked on. Betrayal was so complete, so calculated, it stole the air from my lungs. And there, she was, a grainy paparazzi shot of Chloe in a wedding dress, leaving the hotel for the ceremony. The captions speculated about a surprise twist in the society wedding of the year. I felt the world drop out from under me. The betrayal was so absolute, so complete, it didn't even feel like pain at first. It was a void. She didn't go to explain, she went to replace me. The ceremony was streamed live, of course. I found the link with trembling fingers. I watched it on my phone sitting on the scratchy floral bedspread. There was the cathedral filled with the elite of the city. There was my father beaming with pride walking Chloe down the aisle. He knew, he had to know, the complicity was another knife twist. And then there was Alexander standing at the altar, his expression unreadable, a marble statue. In a tailored tuxedo, Chloe looked triumphant, radiant, her smile wide, as she reached his side. This was everything she had ever wanted. She had stolen it cleanly, and without remorse. The priest began the vows. The familiar words echoed in the vast space. Do you, Alexander, take this woman Chloe to be your lawfully wedded wife? The camera zoomed in on his face. He was looking at her, really looking. And I saw something change in his eyes. It was a dawning clarity later. He told me that in that moment, he didn't see a partner, he saw avarice. He saw the deception in her smile, the shallow victory in her eyes. He realized that our arrangement, mine and his, had been a contract between two honest, unromantic adults. We both knew the score, we respected the terms. What Chloe had done was not pragmatic. It was a treachery that revealed a fundamental lack of character. He understood that a merger built on such a foundation was doomed from the start. He saw that the true partner, the one with the integrity he required, was the one who had been driven away. The priest waited. The whole world waited. The silence stretched, becoming heavy, uncomfortable. Chloe's smile began to falter. Alexander's voice, when he finally spoke, was clear and firm, amplified through the cathedral. It cut through the solemn air like a shard of glass. I cannot. A collective gasp rippled through the congregation. You could see the confusion on the priest's face. My agreement, Alexander continued, his tone leaving no room for argument, was with a leaner. My name, he said, my name in that sacred space. Surrounded by hundreds of people, he rejected her and called for me. The video feed descended into chaos. Chloe's face crumpled from confused smile to utter devastation. The camera jerked away from the altar. As whispers turned into a roar, I saw my father rushing forward, his expression a mask of panic. The screen froze, then cut to a generic holding slide. The transmission had been killed. I sat there, in the silence of the motel room, my phone dark in my hand. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would break my ribs. He called my name. He honored the contract. About an hour later, there was a knock on my motel room door. My first terrified thought was that it was Chloe or my father come to berate me. I peered through the peephole. Two men in impeccably cut suits stood there, their postures relaxed, but authoritative. I knew immediately they were Alexander's security. One of them spoke calmly through the door. Ms. Aliner, Mr. Vance sent us. He would like to see you. I didn't hesitate. I opened the door. They didn't force me. They simply escorted me to a waiting car. Different, even more discreet model than the one I'd fled in. They drove me back to the city, to Alexander's private office. I don't know how long I stood there watching her pretend to be me, but a new kind of energy, fueled by pure anger and desperation, surged through me. I started searching the room frantically. There had to be another way out. In the corner behind some stacked chairs, I found an old small window. It was filthy, but it wasn't locked. I pushed with all my strength, and it creaked open. I squeezed through, tumbling out into a dimly lit alley behind the venue. My dress was torn, covered in dust. I didn't care. He was standing by the window, the city lights spread out below him like a field of diamonds. He turned. When I entered, he looked tired, but his gaze was sharp. He told me everything: Chloe's proposal, his reluctant agreement, and his realization at the altar. A contract is only as strong as the character of the people who sign it. He said your sister has none you despite your flight have it in abundance. You ran from a difficult situation. Out of fear which is human, she orchestrated a betrayal out of greed which is monstrous. He said the merger was still on the table. If I was still willing, the original terms, my signature on the original document, still stood. The fallout was brutal for Chloe. Just as she deserved, the press eviscerated her gold-digger sister's plot, foiled at the altar. She was humiliated on a global scale. My father's temporary salvation vanished, and the reality of his company's collapse returned with a vengeance. They both tried to contact me, of course, pleas, threats, apologies. I never responded. Alexander's legal team handled them. I did marry Alexander a week later in a small private civil ceremony with no family present. It was even more clinical than the first plan. And yet it felt more honest. We have a respect for each other now, a strange kinship built on the rubble of my sister's betrayal. It's not a love story, it's a story of a business arrangement. But in the end, it revealed the true value of things, not the price of a shipping company, but the worth of a person's word. My sister saw his wealth and thought it was the prize. She was wrong. The real prize was his loyalty, and he proved in the most public way imaginable that he gives that loyalty to the person who earns it, not the one who simply covets what he has. It's a strange path to discovering who you can trust, but I suppose I prefer it to never finding out at all. Living in her shadow was a subtle art I perfected over 27 years. It wasn't a dramatic, crushing shadow. Not at first. It was more like a persistent draft, a constant chill, reminding me I was never quite alone. It started with little things. I'd save up for weeks to buy a specific blue sweater, the exact shade of a summer sky. And 2 days after I wore it proudly to school, she'd have the same one, only hers would be a slightly brighter blue, a more expensive brand. My hobbies were a rotating door of fascination for her. The month I took up photography, she bought a better camera. When I joined the debate team, she suddenly discovered a passion for rhetoric. She'd always frame it as coincidence, a shared interest. But the timing was a weapon. She wasn't just copying me, she was trying to build a better, shinier version of my life, right next to mine. But the most precious thing, the one thing I thought was immune, was Thomas. We met in a quiet corner of the library, a complete accident of spilled books and apologies. It wasn't a dramatic love at first sight. It was a slow, steady discovery. He saw past the girl who was constantly being mirrored. He loved the small, quiet parts of me that she could never replicate. The way I hum when I am concentrating, the specific way I tuck my hair behind my ear, only when I am nervous. My irrational fear of porcelain dolls. He collected these details like treasures. My sister, Clara, hated it. She'd try to flirt with him, to insert herself into our conversations, but Thomas would just give her a polite, distant smile. He saw the performance. He'd tell me later, she's like a beautiful echo, all the shape of a sound, but none of the substance. I felt guilty for the surge of triumph that gave me. I dismissed her jealousy as a childish, permanent fixture of our lives. I never, not for a single second, imagined it was a fuse waiting for a match. I ran around to the front of the building and stumbled through the big double doors into the reception hall. I must have been a sight. My hair was a mess, my face smudged with dirt, my dress ruined. The music was still playing, but people near the entrance started to notice me. A wave of whispers spread through the crowd. I ignored them. My eyes were locked on the head table. The theft didn't feel like a crime at first. It felt like a fog. We had a small dinner, just the three of us, the night before the wedding. A sort of casual, familial calm before the storm. Clara was unusually quiet, thoughtful. She insisted on making a toast with a special bottle of wine she'd been saving. I remember the glass felt cool in my hand, the wine a deep, rich red. I remember taking a sip, and then the world just softened at the edges. The lights in the room became halos, and my limbs grew heavy. Thought it was just exhaustion, the culmination of all the planning and stress. Clara's voice was a distant murmur saying something about helping me to bed. The last thing I recall is the pattern on the ceiling swimming above me before everything went black. Waking up was like clawing my way up through layers of thick, heavy clay. My head pounded with a rhythmic, sickening throb. The air was stale and cold. I wasn't in my bedroom. I was on a concrete floor, surrounded by the ghostly shapes of furniture draped in white sheets. A basement. A bolt of pure, undiluted panic shot through me. I tried to stand, but my legs were useless, rubbery things. That's when I saw it, tucked under a dusty sheet near the stairs, was my wedding dress, the one that should have been hanging in my closet. Pristine and waiting, and next to it a small discarded makeup bag I recognized as Clara's. The pieces clicked together with a soundless, horrifying finality. She hadn't just copied my life. She was trying to put it on like a costume. She was going to take my place at the altar. The scale of it was so monstrous, so absurd I almost laughed. But the cold concrete beneath my cheek was real. The locked door at the top of the stairs was real. I was a prisoner in the basement of my own stolen future. Meanwhile, in the bright sun-drenched church, the performance began. I've pieced this part together from what Thomas told me later, from the flashes of video I've forced myself to watch. Clara walked down the aisle, wearing my face shed, practiced my walk, the slight hesitation I have on my left step from an old ballet injury. She had my hair styled exactly as Id wanted it. From a distance, it was a perfect replica. But Thomas told me that from the moment the doors opened, his heart sank. He said the air just felt wrong. Her smile was technically correct, the one Wed practiced in the mirror. But it didn't reach her eyes. My eyes, he said, have tiny flecks of gold in the green. When I am happy, hers were just flat green glass. She was an impeccable statue, a beautiful forgery. And he, the expert, could spot the flaws a mile away. He decided to play a game, a dangerous, quiet game, to expose the fraud. When he took her hands at the altar, he squeezed them in our secret way, 2 quick pulses. She just stared blankly. The minister began the ceremony, and Thomas leaned in and whispered so only she could hear, "You look beautiful, just like you did that night we first met." With all the books scattered on the floor, it was a test, our story. Clara, flustered, just whispered back, "Thank you, it was a funny night, wasn't it?" A generic, safe response. But it was wrong. We never found it funny. We found it fateful. Then louder, as the minister prompted for the rings, Thomas asked, "And y'all remember to play our song for our first dance, right? I know how much you love it." We didn't have a song, Wed argued playfully about it. For weeks, unable to choose, it was a trap. Clara, desperate, nodded eagerly. Of course, our song. The crack in her facade was widening. He could see the panic starting to glitter in her impersonator's eyes. He let it go further. He allowed the minister to get to the part where he asks if anyone knows of any reason these two should not be married. The church was silent. And then Thomas spoke, his voice clear and calm, cutting through the tense air. He wasn't looking at the minister. He was looking directly at the woman wearing my wedding dress. "I know a reason," he said. The entire congregation froze. Clara's face went pale beneath the expertly applied makeup. Thomas took a step closer to her, his voice dropping, but still carrying in the dead silence. "The woman I love has a tiny scar on her right thumb from where she cut herself opening a can of paint when we were redecorating our kitchen. She bites her lower lip. When she's trying not to cry, she thinks she's afraid of heights. But she's actually afraid of the feeling of falling, which is why she loves roller coasters, but hates glass elevators. She hums a specific off-key version of an old jazz standard when she's making coffee in the morning. She cries at commercials with dogs in them." Clara saw me first. Her smile vanished, instantly replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated shock. And then fury. Mark was standing up, holding a microphone. He was about to start his speech. He followed her gaze, and his eyes found mine across the room. The look on his face, it wasn't confusion. It was relief, a profound, overwhelming relief. But not at sad movies. He paused, letting each intimate, insignificant, sacred detail hang in the air. "The woman standing in front of me," he continued, his voice hardening, "doesn't have that scar. Her lip is steady. Her eyes show no recognition of any of these things. Because she is not the woman I love. So I will ask you one more time. Who are you?" The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the velvet aisle. Runner. Clara stood there, completely exposed. The mask didn't just crack, it shattered. The impersonation fell away, and all that was left was my sister, raw, with a lifetime of envy and defeat. She didn't say a word. She just started to cry, ugly, shaking sobs that contorted my face onto hers. The gasps from the pews were like a wave. The authorities were called. The wedding was over. They found me in the basement, disoriented and crying, still in the clothes from the night before. The first thing I saw when the door opened was Thomas. He didn't look like a groom. He looked like a rescuer. He didn't say anything about the ruined ceremony or the scandal. He just knelt down, took my trembling hands, the ones with the real scar on the thumb end, said, "There you are." In that moment, the lost hours, the terror, the betrayal by my own sister, it all faded into a distant hum. The validation was a physical warmth flooding the cold, hollow space her theft had left inside me. He hadn't just known I was an imposter. He had known me truly, deeply, in a way that no forgery, no matter how skilled, could ever hope to imitate. My identity wasn't in my name or my face. It was in the quiet, unremarkable details that only real love bothers to see. The world ended on a Tuesday. It wasn't a grand catastrophic event, not a war or a plague. It was a patch of black ice on a country road. A moment of lost control, the sickening crunch of metal against an old oak tree. My world ended in an instant, leaving behind a perfect diamond-shaped silence. Arrangements were a blur of muted colors and hushed voices. My sister Clara, she took charge, of course she did. She was always the practical one, the one who knew what to do in a crisis. I watched her, a silent spectator, tethered to the place my life had been, as she organized the funeral, sorted through my belongings, and comforted my fiancé David. She was a pillar of strength for him, a steady presence in the wreckage of his future. I saw the way she looked at him, a look I'd seen flicker in her eyes for years. But one shed, always hidden behind a sisterly smile now. With me gone, that look wasn't hidden anymore. It was a raw, desperate hope. David was a ghost himself. He moved through those days in a daze, his eyes hollow, his hands constantly fidgeting with the simple platinum band he was supposed to place on my finger. When Clara suggested eat a small, quiet ceremony, just family, a way to honor the wedding that should have been, just nodded. It was a decision born from utter exhaustion, from a grief so profound that any anchor, even a twisted one, felt like a lifeline. He wasn't marrying her for love, he was marrying her for the ghost of me he thought she represented. And Clara, she saw her opening, and she took it. She was going to wear my dress, stand in my spot, and say my vows. The room had gone quiet. Everyone was staring. Mark cleared his throat, his voice echoing in the sudden silence. He looked at Clara, who was rigid beside him. I want to thank everyone for coming, he began, his voice steady but strained, and especially Clara for all her support today. Clara forced a smile back onto her face. A brittle, terrifying thing. She thought she had recovered. She thought he was playing along. The morning of their wedding dawned bright and clear, a cruel mockery of the soft, rainy day. We had planned for hours. I was there in the room that was once mine, now filled with her things. I watched Clara put on my wedding dress. She had it altered, of course. She was always a little thinner than me, her shoulders narrower. She stood before the mirror, and her reflection showed a woman triumphant. But I could see the tremor in her hands, the guilt she was forcefully swallowing down. She was talking to our mother, who was crying softly, saying things like it's what she would have wanted, and this will help David heal. The lies were so thick in the air, I could almost taste them, a bitter, metallic flavor. I tried to stop it. I poured all my will, all my leftover love, all my fury into the room. I made the lace curtain at the window flutter. When there was no breeze, I caused a single light bulb in the vanity to flicker and die just as she was about to put on her lipstick. I focused everything on a single framed photo of David and me on the beach, sending it crashing to the floor. Clara jumped, her hand flying to her chest. She stared at the shattered glass for a long moment, then shook her head, a nervous little gesture. Just a draft, she muttered to herself, but her eyes were wide with a fear she wouldn't acknowledge. Then it was time. The small chapel was filled with the same people who would have been there for us. Their faces were a mixture of confusion and a strained attempt at support. I drifted among them, unseen, a chill. In the warm room I saw David standing at the altar, his back straight. But his posture was all wrong. It was the stance of a man facing a firing squad. Not his wedding. He kept running a hand through his hair, his gaze fixed on some distant point above everyone's heads. And then the music started, not our song, but something generic and solemn. Clara appeared at the end of the aisle on our father's arm. She was beautiful, I'll give her that. But she watched me. The air grew heavy as she walked towards him. I moved with her, my non-existent heart pounding with a rhythm only I could hear. I went to David. I stood right in front of him, willing him to see me, to feel me. He blinked, and his eyes, which had been so distant, suddenly focused. He frowned slightly, as if trying to clear fog from his mind. He could sense it, a presence, a familiar scent of jasmine that had been my perfume, a feeling of being watched from a point just inches from his face. The minister began the vows. The words were the same, but they sounded hollow, sacrilegious. Do you, David, take Clara? I saw David flinch, almost imperceptibly, at the sound of her name. This was the moment. This was my only chance. I had no voice, no body, nothing but the essence of who I was, the love we had shared, the future that was stolen. I gathered every last shred of my being, every memory, every whispered promise in the dark, every laugh we ever shared. I focused it all into a single desperate point of energy. I reached out. I couldn't touch him, not really, but I placed all my intention where my hand would have been, on his shoulder. A wave of cold so intense it was pure feeling washed over him. He shuddered, his eyes widening. And then I pushed the very core of my identity into the space between us. It wasn't a sound. It was an impulse, a memory, a direct injection of truth into his soul. It was my name, not Clara's, mine. But then he paused, he looked away from her, his eyes finding mine again. And he said it. His voice was clear and strong, ringing through the hall. But my heart has always belonged to Sarah. The minister was waiting for his response. The entire chapel was holding its breath. Clara was looking up at him, her smile beginning to falter under the intensity of his stare. David's mouth opened. But no sound came out. He looked utterly lost, trapped between this reality and the one I was pushing from the other side. His jaw tightened. He looked from Clara's expectant face to the empty space in front of him, to the feeling of cold on his shoulder that was now spreading through his entire body. And then it happened. His voice, when it came, was not his own. It was low, choked, filled with a wonder and a horror that echoed in the silent chapel. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, a revelation, a fact delivered from somewhere beyond. He said my name. Just my name, but it was enough. It cut through the pretense like a shard of glass. The sound of it, my real name in that context, was a thunderclap. Clara's face went white. The fragile illusion she had so carefully constructed shattered into a million pieces. The polite support in the faces of the guests turned to shock and dawning understanding. You could see the pieces clicking into place for them. The strange haste, the uncomfortable feeling they'd all suppressed, now making terrible, perfect sense. David seemed to come back to himself, staring at Clara, as if seeing her for the first time. I felt her. He whispered, his voice raw. She's here. And this is all wrong. The composure Clara had maintained collapsed. A strangled sound escaped her lips, a mixture of a sob and a scream, and her legs gave way. She fainted right there, at the altar, my wedding dress pooling around her like a lie exposed. The chapel erupted in a chaos of gasps and movement. People rushed forward. But David just stood there, his eyes closed, his face tilted upwards. He wasn't seeing the chaos, he was finally feeling the grief, the real honest grief he had been avoiding. He was saying goodbye. And I felt it too. A warmth began to spread through me, a warmth I hadn't felt since the cold of the accident, the desperate clawing need to be seen, to be acknowledged. It just dissolved the tether that had held me to that place of injustice. And anger snapped. I looked at David, at the honest pain on his face, and I knew he would be all right. He wouldn't be trapped in a marriage built on a grave. He would heal now properly. The colors of the world began to soften, to bleed together into a gentle welcoming light. The sounds of the commotion faded, becoming distant, like listening to the ocean from inside a shell. I took one last look, not at the scene of the ruined wedding, but at the man I loved finally facing the truth. There was no anger left, just a profound, peaceful love. And then I simply let go. The light embraced me, and the last thing I felt was not the cold of death, but the warmth of finally going home. The summer I turned 17, I thought I had the whole world figured out. It was a specific kind of certainty, you know, the kind that only exists when you're young and you've fallen in love for the first time. His name was Liam. And it wasn't just a high school crush. It was this deep, quiet understanding between us. We'd study together, in the library, not saying a word for hours, just sharing the same space, the same air. He had this way of looking at me like he could see right through all the noise and the anxiety and find the real person hiding underneath. We'd drive out to the old bridge on the edge of town and just talk for hours, watching the sunset paint the river in shades of orange and purple. He told me he wanted to be an architect, to build things that lasted, and I believed he would. I believed we would. We had this plan after graduation. We were both going to state school, we'd get an apartment. It was all mapped out, this future that felt as solid and real as the ground beneath our feet. My name, he said, my name. It hung in the air for a moment, stark and undeniable. Then the room erupted into a chaos of gasps and murmurs. Clara's face completely crumpled. The mask she had been wearing all day, all her life, may be shattered into 1,000 pieces. The deception was laid bare for everyone to see. The perfect wedding was instantly, irrevocably broken. My sister Clara was 2 years older. She was always the popular one, the one who commanded a room just by walking into it. She had this magnetic energy, but there was a sharpness to it, a competitive edge she usually saved for her friends. With me, I thought we were fine. I looked up to her. I'd borrow her clothes, ask her for advice about boys, about life. She'd always smile and give me these little tidbits of wisdom. But there was something in her eyes sometimes, when I'd talk about Liam, a flicker of something I couldn't name. I mistook it for sisterly concern. I was so naive. The rumor started small, just a whisper in the hallways between classes. Then it got louder, more detailed. It was a vicious, ugly story about me cheating on Liam with one of his friends. A complete fabrication. But it was crafted with just enough plausibility to be believable. I remember the day Liam confronted me. His face was pale, his jaw tight. He asked me if it was true. I laughed at first, thinking it was a joke. But it wasn't. The trust in his eyes was gone, replaced by a cold, hard hurt. I pleaded with him. I told him it was a lie, that I would never do that to him. But the rumor had already done its work, poisoning everything. Clara was right there, of course. She put her arm around me, told me how awful it was that people would spread such lies. And then she went to Liam. She told him how devastated I was, how she was sure it was all a misunderstanding, but that the damage was done. She played the comforting older sister to both of us, all while being the architect of the entire disaster. The breakup was brutal. The looks in the hallways, the silence, where there used to be easy conversation. It felt like my heart had been ripped out. I couldn't face school. I couldn't face our town. I applied to a college on the other side of the country and left as soon as I could. I packed my bags and I ran, and within months, I heard the news from my mom. Clara and Liam had started dating. She was there to pick up the pieces. She was his shoulder to cry on, and she seamlessly slid into the space I had left behind. They were married less than 2 years later, a beautiful wedding. My mom said I didn't go. I sent a gift and made up an excuse about finals. I built a life for myself 3,000 miles away. I had a career, friends. I even dated other people. But it was always there, that shadow, the pain of that lost love, and the deeper, more lingering sting of the betrayal, the knowledge that my own sister had looked at my happiness and decided it should be hers. 10 years is a long time. You change, the world changes. But some things have a strange way of staying frozen. My dad's 70th birthday party was the event that finally pulled me back. I couldn't avoid it forever. I flew back to my hometown, my stomach in knots. The entire flight. Walking into my parents' house was like stepping into a time capsule. And there they were, Clara and Liam, the perfect couple. She looked polished, successful, her arm linked through his. He looked older. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. He smiled, but it didn't seem to reach his eyes. We exchanged the usual pleasantries. How have you been? Your career sounds great. You look wonderful. It was all so brittle, so carefully rehearsed. I could feel Clara's eyes on me. The whole time watching, assessing. Liam was quiet, withdrawn. He kept glancing at me when he thought no one was looking, a quiet, unreadable expression on his face. The whole evening felt like a performance, a play where everyone knew their lines, except for me. I felt like I was just waiting for my cue, for the moment the facade would crack. As the night went on, people started drinking more, the music got louder, the conversations more animated. But there was a tension building between Clara and Liam. I saw them by the kitchen door having a heated, whispered argument. Her face was tight with anger. His was set in a stubborn mask. It escalated quickly. Her voice rose, cutting through the murmur of the party. Why are you being like this tonight? Why can't you just pretend to be happy for once? Liam's reply was low and bitter. Maybe I'm tired of. You see, Mark and we had a thing, a secret, intense, all-consuming thing that lasted for almost a year. It started before he ever met my sister. We met at a work conference completely by chance. And the connection was instant. It was like we'd known each other for lifetimes. We'd spend hours on the phone talking about everything, our dreams, our fears. It was real. But then life got complicated. My job was unstable. His family was putting pressure on him. We started arguing over stupid, petty things. Mark didn't hesitate. He dropped the microphone and started walking towards me, pushing past chairs and stunned guests. He reached me and took my hands. His were warm, solid. I've been looking for you all day, he said, his voice low. Just for me. She told me you'd left, that you couldn't handle it, that you sent your apologies. I didn't believe her, but I didn't know what to do. He looked back at Clara, who was now crying real tears, tears of humiliation and rage. She's been different today, possessive, telling me you were pretending. Clara, maybe I'm tired of this whole act. That's when she snapped. All the polished perfection fell away, and what was left was raw and furious. An act? You think this is an act? After everything I've done for you, after everything I sacrificed. He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. Sacrificed? What did you ever sacrifice? You got exactly what you wanted. The words hung in the air for a second, and then Clara, blinded by a decade of resentment and maybe a few too many glasses of champagne, screamed it. She screamed the truth right there, in the middle of my parents' living room, in front of all their friends and family. I made it all up. I lied to break you up, because I wanted him. I was sick of watching her have everything, including you. Is that what you want to hear? I did it. I told you she was cheating, because I couldn't stand the sight of the two of you together. The room didn't just go quiet, it became a vacuum, all the sound was sucked out of it, you could hear the ice melting in someone's glass, every single person was frozen staring at Clara. Then at me, then at Liam. His face went through a transformation first. There was shock, pure, unadulterated shock, then confusion, as his brain tried to process the words. And then a dawning terrible clarity. It was like watching a puzzle piece click into place. After 10 years of it being missing, he slowly turned his head. And his eyes found mine across the room. They were wide, filled with a pain I recognized instantly. Because it was the same pain I'd carried for a decade. He looked at me. And for the first time in 10 years, he really saw me, not the ghost of me, not the memory, but me. And he said my name. It was so soft, almost a whisper, like he was testing the sound of it. After all this time, Sarah. Then he said it again, stronger, with more force, like a statement, like a verdict. Sarah, it was always you. And in that moment, the entire last decade dissolved. The wedding, the house, the life they built, towed through it, all crumbled into dust. Exposed as a beautiful, intricate lie. The past wasn't just the past anymore. It was right here in this room, raw and alive. The future, which had seemed so fixed and certain just minutes before, was now a vast, terrifying, and exhilarating blank page. Everything was different. Everything had changed. Jealous that you were trying to ruin things. It all made sense. Her insistence on me giving the speech, her weird demeanor. She was setting the stage, planting seeds of doubt, making herself look like the victim. She wanted to completely cut me out of his life, even from his memory of this day. I looked at my sister, at the ruin of her perfect scheme. There was no victory in it, not really, just a deep, profound sadness for what she had become, for what she had thrown away. But when I looked back at Mark, at the honest, pained love in his eyes, I felt something else, a strange, quiet emancipation. He didn't let go of my hand. Let's get out of here, he said. And we did. We walked out of that reception hall, past all the staring eyes, past my weeping sister, past the ruins of the wedding. We stepped out into the cool night air. The facade was gone, the lies were exposed. And for the first time in a very long time, standing there with him, everything felt terrifyingly, beautifully real. It wasn't a happy ending. Not yet. It was just a beginning, a messy, complicated, honest beginning. And it was ours. I stood at the altar, tying my tie for the 5th time. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Everyone kept patting my shoulder, grinning, saying it was just the normal jitters. But this wasn't nerves. This was a deep, cold feeling in the pit of my stomach. A persistent hum of wrongness that had been building for weeks. I looked at Clara, my bride, standing near the door of the vestry. And she gave me this tight, possessive smile. It didn't reach her eyes. It was more like she'd won a prize. She'd been like that for months, ever since I'd proposed. Clara was always there, always inserting herself, always a little too close. I'd thought she was just being a supportive sister. But this smile, it was different. It was a claim. And all I could think about was Emily. Where was Emily? She was supposed to be here an hour ago to help with the final preparations. Clara had brushed it off, saying Emily wasn't feeling well, a sudden migraine, that she might have to miss the ceremony, but would be at the reception. It sounded flimsy. Even then, Emily had never had a migraine in her life. Walking down the aisle, I scanned the crowd. Her parents were there, beaming, friends, family. But no Emily. The absence was like a hole in the room. I kept waiting for her to slip into a back pew, to give me that little wave. She always did nothing. Clara came towards me on her father's arm, radiant in her white dress. She looked beautiful, but she wasn't the face I dreamed of at night. When we said our vows, my voice was hollow. I was saying the words to Clara, but I was thinking of Emily. I remembered a private joke we had, a silly thing about garden gnomes. I whispered it to Clara as we turned to face the congregation. A little test. She just blinked, her smile never wavering, and squeezed my arm. A cold dread started to solidify inside me. She didn't get it. She had no idea what I was talking about. It ended badly. A huge, messy fight full of things we didn't mean. We cut ties. I was devastated, but I thought I had to be strong to move on. The photographer herded us for pictures. The wedding party. The family still know Emily. I asked again, my voice strained. Where's your sister? Is she okay? Clara's smile tightened. She's resting at home, darling. She's so upset to miss this. But she'll be at the reception, I am sure of it. But her eyes darted away from mine for a second. It was a tiny thing, a flicker. But I saw it. The inconsistencies were piling up. The way Clara knew details about conversations I was certain I'd only had with Emily. The way she'd started using a specific phrase Emily loved. It was like she was performing a version of her sister. But she hadn't learned all her lines. The sense of dread wasn't a hum anymore, it was a roar in my ears. The reception was in a grand ballroom, all chandeliers and golden light. I plastered a smile on my face and decided to play along. If I caused a scene now without proof, it'd look like a monster. I had to be smart, I had to find the truth, so I played the doting groom. I held Clara's hand, I laughed at the toasts, I danced with her. But my mind was racing. I engaged her in conversation, steering it toward memories only Emily and I shared. I mentioned the weekend, we got lost hiking the specific brand of terrible coffee we drank at that all-night diner. Each time Clara would nod along, but her responses were just a beat too slow, a little too generic. Oh, that was such a fun trip, she'd say. Or I love that place. She was mirroring, not remembering. The performance was flawless on the surface, but I could see the cracks. I excused myself to get a drink, needing a moment away from her. I walked towards the quieter end of the hall near the restrooms and a small corridor that led to a few private function rooms. The venue was an old estate with lots of little nooks, and that's when I saw it, a flicker of movement from under the door of a room marked private supplies. It was just a shadow, a shift in the light, but it made my heart stop. That room was supposed to be locked, empty. The hope that surged through me was so violent it was painful. I walked closer, pretending to be checking my phone. I heard it, then a faint sound, a sniffle, muffled like someone trying to be quiet. I pressed my ear to the cool wood of the door. Nothing then, a soft, ragged breath. Emily, I knew it was her, I felt it in my bones. I had to get back to the main room before Clara noticed. I was gone, my mind was a whirlwind. Shed locked her in there, her own sister, to steal her place at the altar. The betrayal was so vast, so cold. It was almost unbelievable. But it was the only thing that made sense. The illness, the absence, the failed tests. It all clicked into place with a terrible final clarity. I went back to the party, my smile now a rigid mask. I waited for my moment. It came during the speeches. The best man finished, and it was my turn. The microphone felt cold and heavy in my hand. I looked out at the sea of smiling, expectant faces. I looked at Clara sitting at the head table, her expression one of triumphant adoration. And I felt nothing, no love, no affection, just a burning anger at her deception, and a desperate need to find Emily. I opened my mouth to start the usual thank yous, but my words faltered. My eyes were fixed on that corridor. And then, as if my hope had willed it into being, the door creaked open. She stood there, pale and shaking, still in the simple blue dress she'd been wearing when she'd left her house this morning. Her eyes were wide with fear and disbelief, scanning the crowded room until they found mine. The world seemed to slow down. The clinking glasses, the laughter, it all faded into a dull buzz. There was only her face, the real face, the one that held all my happiness. Clara saw her too. I watched the color drain from my bride's face, her perfect composure cracking into sheer panic. And then 6 months later, he showed up at a family barbecue with my sister. She introduced him as her new boyfriend, beaming with pride, the look on his face. It was pure shock, then panic. My sister Clara, she knew. I'd confided in her during our relationship, showed her pictures. She knew exactly who he was. She claimed it was just a crazy coincidence, that she had no idea until that moment. I wanted to believe her for the sake of our family. I tried. I didn't think there was no decision to make. The truth was standing right there. I leaned into the microphone, my voice clear and strong, cutting through the festive noise. Emily. I said her name. It wasn't a question, it was a declaration. It was a lifetime of love and a day of anguish packed into 2 syllables. The room fell silent. All heads turned to look at her, then back at me. I dropped the microphone. It hit the podium with a thud and a screech of feedback. But I was already moving. I walked away from the head table, my steps quick and sure, straight towards Emily. The crowd parted for me, a wave of confused whispers rising in my wake. I heard Clara's voice, sharp and shrill, behind me. James, what are you doing? James, come back. I didn't even turn around. I reached Emily. She was trembling, tears streaming down her face now. She locked me in. She whispered, her voice breaking. She said you'd changed your mind, that you wanted her. She said, if I loved you, I'd let you be happy. I pulled her into my arms, holding her tight. The relief was so overwhelming. I felt dizzy. I am so sorry, I murmured into her hair. I am so sorry, I didn't know sooner. The room was in chaos. Guests were standing, talking loudly. Clara was rushing towards us, her face a mask of fury and humiliation. Her parents were trying to calm her, their expressions a mixture of shock and dawning horror. I looked at Clara standing there in her wedding dress, and I felt a pang of pity. But it was quickly overshadowed by anger. It's over, Clara, I said, my voice low. but carrying in the sudden quiet everyone here knows the truth now. We walked out of that ballroom together hand in hand, leaving the scandal, and the wreckage of the wedding behind. We didn't look back. The afternoon sun was bright outside, a stark contrast to the artificial glow of the ballroom. The air felt clean sitting in my car. The silence was peaceful, not empty. The chaos of the day was behind the glass. A distant storm. I looked at Emily, her hand in mine. Her presence. A solid, real thing after hours of terrible uncertainty. The choice wasn't hard, it was the easiest, most clarifying decision of my life. All the pretending, the social expectations, the fear of a scandal, it all melted away. There was only the right person, there was only her, and no locked door or cruel lie could ever change that. Of course, here is the story. I convinced myself it was the noble thing to do, the right thing. He was too good for me. You see, a man like Daniel, with his quiet strength and his unwavering kindness, he deserved a love that was pure, uncomplicated, a love without a shadow. And I carried a shadow. It was a stupid mistake, a moment of weakness from years ago. But I could never quite shake the feeling that it had stained me, that I was damaged goods, and he in his goodness was just too blind to see it. My sister Clara, she saw it differently. She saw my hesitation as an opportunity. She came to me the night before the wedding, her eyes were redrimmed, pleading. She confessed everything. She'd been in love with Daniel since the moment she'd met him, which was of course the day I introduced him to the family. She told me she'd been living in a special kind of hell watching us plan our future. She said she knew she could make him happy, that she could offer him a clean slate, a life without the baggage of my past. Let me have this, she whispered, her hand clutching mine. You're stronger than me, you can survive the. So here I was, pinning a veil onto the head of the woman, marrying the love of my life. The irony was so thick you could taste it. Clara turned to me, her eyes glistening with happy tears. I am so glad you're here with me, she said, squeezing my hand. Her grip was a little too tight. You have to give a speech tonight, a really good one. You're the only one who really knows me. There was something in her voice, a strange sharp edge beneath the sweetness, a flicker in her eyes that wasn't quite joy, it was more like triumph. Heartbreak. I don't think I can survive watching him be yours. And in that moment, my own insecurities wrapped themselves around her words like poisonous vines. She was right, he deserved a clean slate. He deserved someone who didn't lie awake at night questioning her own worth. So I made the sacrificial decision. I would step aside. The plan was simple, pathetic really. I would pretend to be violently ill the morning of the wedding, too sick to even get out of bed. Clara would be there, the devoted sister. Moment of dramatic necessity. She would offer to stand in for me just to keep the ceremony from being cancelled. It was a flimsy story, but we were banking on the chaos and emotion of the day to sell it. The morning of the wedding, I played my part. I stayed in my old bedroom at my mother's house, the room Clara and I had shared as girls. I could hear the frantic energy downstairs, the florists arriving, the low murmur of the wedding planner's voice. I smeared makeup under my eyes to look hollow, and pulled my hair into a messy knot when my mother came and her face fell. She felt my forehead, her hand cool and worried. I told her it must have been something I ate, that I could barely lift my head. I saw the genuine panic in her eyes, and a wave of guilt so powerful washed over me, I nearly vomited for real. Then Clara came in, the picture of concern in her simple lavender dress, soon to be swapped for a white gown. She played her role, perfectly suggesting the swap with a tremor in her voice that sounded so authentic. I heard the hushed, desperate conversation outside my door. And then the decision was made. They were going ahead with it. Daniel had agreed. That was the knife twist. He had agreed so easily, it confirmed everything. Feared. He was relieved, perhaps relieved to be spared a life with me. Once the house was empty, everyone gone to the church, I got out of bed. The sickness was real now, a churning acidic dread in my stomach. I put on a dark plain dress and a large hat, something to hide my face. I drove to the church like a ghost, parking far away. I slipped in through a side door near the choir loft. There was a small dusty alcove there, with a slatted window that overlooked the entire sanctuary. I'd discovered it as a child. It was my hiding spot, and now it was my torture chamber. From that high vantage point, I watched it all unfold. The church was beautiful, filled with soft light from the stained glass windows. Everyone was there, all our friends and family, their faces turned toward the altar. The music began. And then I saw her, Clara, walking down the aisle on my father's arm. She was wearing my wedding dress, the one Daniel and I had chosen together after months of looking. She had altered it slightly, I could see, making it more to her taste. She looked beautiful, serene. And then I saw him. Daniel standing at the end of the aisle waiting. His back was to me, But I saw him turn. As she approached, I saw his shoulders straight and steady. I couldn't see his face. And that was the worst part. My mind filled in the blanks. I imagined him smiling, a look of calm acceptance. Relief. The agony of that pretense was a physical pain. It felt like my ribs were cracking open. With every word the pastor spoke, with every nod, they exchanged. A little piece of me crumbled to dust. I was witnessing my own funeral. This was the life I had given away. I had handed my future to my sister on a silver platter. And I had to sit here and watch her enjoy the first course. I thought I was being selfless. But watching them, I understood it was just a different kind of selfishness. It was the coward's way out. I was hiding from my own happiness. Because I was too afraid I might ruin it later. The ceremony moved to the vows. Clara recited her vows. First, they were the traditional ones. But she infused them with a conviction that stunned me. She spoke of devotion and loyalty, of building a life together. She meant every word. And then it was Daniel's turn. The pastor nodded to him. Daniel unfolded a small piece of paper. He cleared his throat. And then he went completely off script. He looked out at the congregation. And his voice, usually so measured, was thick with emotion. When we stand here, he brushed it off. I told myself, it was just wedding day nerves for both of us. Began we make promises for the future, but my love, it isn't based on a future I hope for, it's rooted in a past I lived through. My breath caught in my throat. He continued, it's rooted in the knowledge that people are imperfect, that we make mistakes. I fell in love with a woman who taught me the true meaning of forgiveness, not the easy kind, but the hard, messy, life-altering kind. She believed she had a flaw, a stain that made her unworthy. But she was wrong. That perceived flaw, it was the very thing that made me love her more. It made her real, it made her brave. The church was utterly silent. Clara's smile had frozen on her face. Daniel's eyes were scanning the crowd row by row. He was looking for someone. My heart was beating so loudly, I was sure the entire church could hear it. And then his gaze stopped. It traveled upward past the faces of the guests, past the choir loft, and landed directly on my hiding spot. He couldn't possibly see me through the slats in the dim light. But he was looking right at me. He knew I was there. She thought stepping aside was an act of sacrifice. He said, his voice firm and clear, now ringing through the sanctuary. She thought she was unworthy. But the only thing she's guilty of is not believing in my love. The only cowardice is in running from it. He paused. And the silence was heavier than any sound I'd ever heard. Clara, I am so sorry for the pain this causes you. But these vows, this promise, it was never meant for you. He took a deep breath, his eyes still locked on mine. Sarah. He said my name, echoing in the sacred space. Sarah, these vows are for you. I knew about this plan. I played along, because I needed you to see, I needed you to understand that my love for you isn't conditional on your perfection. It's because of your humanity. I can't do this without you. I want. The reveal was like a bomb detonating. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. Clara stared at him, her face a mask of utter horror and betrayal. She took a step back, her hand flying to her mouth. She looked from Daniel to where he was staring. And she saw me. The hatred in her eyes was a tangible force. I was frozen in my alcove, a statue of shock. But then something broke inside me. The wall of self-doubt I had built brick by brick over the years just shattered. Without thinking, I moved. I pushed open the small creaking door of the alcove and walked out onto the landing of the choir loft. Every head in the church turned to look at me. I must have been a strange sight in my dark dress, my face pale. I started walking down the narrow spiral staircase to the main level. My legs felt like jelly. But I didn't stop. I walked down the side aisle, toward the altar. The reconciliation happened with few words. Clara was crying now, angry, humiliated tears. She ripped the bouquet from her hands and threw it on the ground. Before turning and running out a side door, my parents looked stunned, confused. But I only had eyes for Daniel. He had stepped down from the altar and was walking toward me. We met in the middle of the aisle. He didn't say anything. He just opened his arms, and I walked into them. The embrace was everything. It was an anchor in a storm. It was a homecoming. He held me so tightly, as if he was afraid I might still disappear. He whispered into my hair, it was always you, only you. And in that moment, surrounded by the wreckage of our almost wedding, we found a love that was stronger and more honest than anything I could have imagined. It was a love that had seen the worst of my fears and hadn't flinched. It was a love that was brave enough for the hard, messy truth, and it was finally completely ours. The world came back in pieces. First it was the smell, sharp, sterile like bleach, and something else, something metallic. Then it was the light, a dull, grayish glow behind my eyelids. I tried to open them, but the weight was immense. My head was a bell that had been struck a single painful note, ringing through my entire skull. The ceremony was a blur. I remember walking down the aisle, my bouquet, feeling like a lead weight. I remember taking my place beside her, seeing Mark's face. He looked pale, his eyes met mine for a second. And there was a question in them, a deep unspoken sadness that mirrored my own. Then he looked away back at Clara, and put on his own perfect smile. The whole thing felt like a play. And we were all terrible actors saying our lines. A voice cut through the fog, soft, familiar, but strange. She's waking up, doctor. I think she's waking up. I forced my eyes open. The light was blinding for a second. Shapes swimming into focus, a ceiling of white tiles, a curtain drawn partway, and a face leaning over me, a face I knew, my sister Clara. Her usually perfect blonde hair was a little messy, her makeup smudged under her eyes. She looked tired, she looked worried. Clara, my voice was a dry croak. What happened? She took my hand, her grip almost too tight. There was an accident, sweetie. A car accident. You've been out for a few days. But you're okay, you're going to be okay. An accident, the word meant nothing. I tried to sit up, a wave of dizziness and nausea washing over me. Clara pushed me gently back against the pillows. Easy, just take it easy. My eyes drifted around the room, landing on a small bag sitting on a chair. It was a garment bag, pale ivory, and peeking out from the top was a swath of lace and delicate beading, a wedding dress. A jolt, something like recognition, but without any details, shot through me. The wedding, I whispered the words, feeling foreign on my tongue. My wedding, it's soon, isn't it? Clara's face changed, the worry deepened. But there was something else there, a flicker of something I couldn't name. She squeezed my hand again. No, honey, no, there's no wedding. The ringing in my head got louder. What? No, that's not right. I'm getting married to Mark. Saying his name felt like finding a key. But I had no lock to put it in. Mark. The name brought a warmth, a ghost of a feeling. But no face, no memories. Clara's expression softened into something pitying. Oh, sweetheart. That's the head injury talking. Ure confused you. And Mark, that was a long time ago. It didn't work out. You've been so supportive of us, of me, and Mark. After the vows, during the photos, I started to feel really unwell, dizzy. The world tilted slightly. Clara was right there, her arm around me. You look pale. She said, her voice full of sisterly concern. Come on, let's get you some water. You just need to sit down for a minute. She led me away from the crowd, down a long, quiet hallway, to a small, dark room off the back of the venue. It was a storage closet, I think, with a single chair here. Rest, she said, handing me a glass of water. I'll come get you when it's. The room seemed to tilt. You and Mark. Yes, she said, her voice firm, soothing. Mark and I are getting married this Saturday. That's my dress. You were on your way to the final fitting with me when the accident happened. I stared at her, my sister, my calm, capable sister. It made a terrible, twisted kind of sense. Why would she lie? But the feeling was all wrong. A deep, instinctual part of me was screaming that this was a lie, a horrible mistake. But my mind was a blank slate. She was etching the story onto it. And I had nothing to contradict her with, nothing but a hollow, aching feeling in my chest. The next few days were a blur of tests and disorientation. Clara was always there, a constant presence. She brought me magazines, talked about the wedding plans, pointed out floral arrangements and cake designs, as if I were her excited maid of honor. Every time I tried to grasp a memory, any memory of Mark and me, she would gently steer me away. That's not real, honey. That's a false memory. The doctor said this might happen. Your brain is trying to fill in the gaps with things that aren't true. She was so convincing, so calm, and I was so lost. The day of the wedding arrived. I stood in the back of the beautiful sun-drenched garden chapel, a guest at an event that felt like a waking nightmare. I wore a pale lavender dress. Clara had chosen for me, your favorite color, said, but it felt like a costume. All around me people were smiling, chatting, family, friends, relatives. They greeted me with hugs and sympathetic looks. So glad you're okay, they'd say. What a terrible thing to happen right before your sister's big day. Their words solidified Clara's story. This was the reality. I was just a bystander. Then I saw him. Mark. He stood at the altar, handsome in his tailored tuxedo, a nervous smile playing on his lips as he talked with the best man. And the moment I saw him, my entire body reacted. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't a memory, not a clear one. It was a physical pull, a magnetic force drawing me to him, a flash quick and bright of his head thrown back in laughter, the sound rich and warm, a sensation of his hand rough and gentle brushing a stray hair from my face, the scent of his cologne, something clean, Woody seemed to materialize out of nowhere. Time for the reception. I was so out of it. I just drank the water. It tasted a little bitter. But I thought nothing of it. The last thing I remember is her smile, a tight, closed-lipped smile. As she closed the door, I heard a click, a definite final click. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was real. This feeling was the truest thing I had felt since waking up. Clara appeared at my side, her hand on my arm, her grip firm. You look pale. She whispered, her voice low and urgent. Maybe you should sit down. It's a lot of excitement. Her eyes were hard, warning me. She steered me towards a seat at the end of a pew, away from the front, isolating me. The music began, the wedding march. Everyone stood. Clara walked down the aisle, a vision in the ivory lace dress I had seen in the hospital. She looked radiant, perfect, but her eyes, as she passed me, held a cold, triumphant gleam that made my blood run cold. She took her place beside Mark. The officiant began to speak words about love and commitment. They washed over me, meaningless. All I could see was Mark, the way his shoulders were tense, the way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes when he looked at Clara. He kept glancing towards the congregation, his gaze scanning the faces. A faint line of confusion etched between his brows. Was he looking for someone? Then his eyes found mine. It was like a lightning strike. The connection was instantaneous, electric. His gaze locked onto me. And for a long, suspended moment, the entire world faded away. It was just us in his eyes. I saw a universe of unspoken questions, a deep, profound pain. And in that pain, I saw the reflection of my own loss. The officiant's voice cut through the silence. And do you, Mark, take Clara? Mark didn't look away from me. His jaw tightened. He opened his mouth to speak the words that would seal my sister's lie, that would erase me forever. He hesitated. The pause was deafening. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Clara squeezed his arm, a sharp, possessive gesture. Mark. She whispered, her voice a tense hiss, barely audible over the quiet rustling of the guests. But Mark was still looking at me. His eyes were wide, pleading, as if he was willing me to remember. And in that desperate, silent communication, something broke open inside me.